do have new people coming into our staff that we are just more, organized toward that process. Also, the health and dental plans were managed well by the people who know how to do that. So regarding our new pastor discernment, before December, we revised our church profile, so this describes our church. We developed questions that we might want to ask somebody coming in. And we had a startup meeting with Reverend Cindy Gregerson. She's the director of Connectional Ministries and clergy assistant to the bishop. And she was able to really hear what our needs are to understand our church. And she has visited here, numerous times. And she understands kind of who we are, what we want, what we need from that standpoint. We also invited some representatives from Church Council, Tony, Finance, Byron, and Children and Youth, Sarah, to join the SPRC in this discernment process. So it's not just SPRC involved. Since January, we've reviewed credentials of 3 leading candidates, and it's been all anonymous. We don't know age, gender, anything. We just have heard about them and learned about them, and it's very interesting to really look at it through that lens. We provided feedback to Reverend Gregerson about those 3 candidates, and then she's reviewing that with Bishop Lynette Plombeck and the cabinet. And the next step then is that the bishop and the cabinet will take our feedback and they'll narrow the discernment down to a sole candidate. And then Reverend Gregerson will meet with that person and share why it's believed that they might be the best selection. And then in February, we tentatively have an in-person meeting set up to meet the candidate. And then once agreed upon, we'll announce the news the following Sunday so that there won't be a great lag time. And a letter will be sent to the congregation the next business day. Then looking forward to 2024, just some big key items. We really want to think about celebrating Pastor Carol's leadership as and to honor her and wish her well. So be thinking about that. We want to also ensure a smooth transition with the new lead pastor, and it will be done with prayer and presence and great care. We also will continue to develop a strategic approach to our staffing in alignment with church vision and funding. We've had to work closely with finance people because of the financial aspect of it when it comes to human resources. Are there any questions?
Thank you. Thank you, Lynn. And if you think of a question as we progress, you can still ask a staff parish question 15 minutes from now. So I invite Rick to come forward. And this is still on for you, Rick.
That'll work.
Thank you.
Good morning. I don't have a slide presentation. Carol told me there were going to be 2 buttons, and that's more than I can deal with. So I'm just going to tell you what happened and be happy to answer any questions. The first thing I'd like to say is the Board of Trustees is currently made up of 5 members. I believe we sort of officially have 2 vacancies, so if there's anyone interested in participating, particularly women, we are looking for to participate on the board. We have 1 woman out of the 5 of us, but we should have a better representation. So I'd encourage you, if you're interested or if you know someone who might be interested, it's the most fun committee in the church, that I can guarantee you, and it's really not even, it's not very hard work. One of the reasons it's not very hard work is because of our outstanding building engineer, Dan Rogers Green. If none of you have had an opportunity to greet Dan and thank him during his week while he's here keeping the body of the church together, you should really do that, because Dan has been such a blessing for the church and particularly for the Board of Trustees. He attends all of our meetings, brings us up to date on the condition of the building, the condition of the grounds, and that's just been an enormous help to us on the trustees. I have good news to report, only good news to report this morning for the Board of Trustees, so I'm happy to do that. The biggest project that you probably remember from 2023 was putting the steel roof on, primarily on the sanctuary. This was done, for those of you that have been around a while, you know that we've had occasional water features in the sanctuary, unintended, and that has been a challenge for us, but it's a very expensive roof to replace. Thanks largely to Dan and his eagle eye, he noticed some hail damage on the roof, and we were able to get an insurance settlement that paid for the entire cost of replacing the roof, and that's more than $250,000. So it is a significant accomplishment. And I don't know, knock on wood, is that official in a church? But please God, the leaks will stop, and we'll have a successful roof for years to come due to that work. We did, by the way, in the process of that, discover that the roof that had been placed originally on the church was not placed on correctly, and that was a reason for some of the water leakage that we ended up having. The roof did not last as long as a steel roof should have lasted, and so, but with the contractor that we had, who did a great job in spite of some challenging weather during the project, hopefully we will have a dry inside of the church for years and years to come. The second thing to report is that in the same hailstorm, we had damage to some of our rooftop air conditioning units. They're still functioning, but they were damaged. We have received a partial insurance settlement for the repair of those units. There's additional insurance money available depending on what we do. And we have some pretty old air conditioning units on the roof of the church. They are not with the current technology, the replacement parts, and particularly the Freon coolant that goes in them may not be available, and so it's a bit of a challenge. We had several proposals for what to do, and found it very confusing because you get a lot of apples and oranges. Everybody had a different recommendation, and it was hard to compare. So we retained an engineering firm that went up and did an analysis for us. We just got their report last week, and what they told us was, they gave us essentially a term sheet saying, these are the things we think you should do, and you should ask contractors to bid against these things, so that every bid will compare apples to apples, and we'll be able to look at the bids. And so that work, if we can get it all set up, could be done in the spring once the weather improves. But we're in the process now of evaluating what to do with these rooftop air conditioning units, and we have some insurance money and possibly more insurance money that will help us pay for that. So that's very good news. The last thing I'll report, I guess maybe this is not good news or bad news, it's just news. This church has, as you may know, a lot of windows, hundreds of them actually. And many of these windows were original with the construction of the church, and many of them are in very, very bad shape. And so we are starting the process now of evaluating our windows and trying to put together a plan for the replacement of the windows over time because it will be very expensive. And so those of you that may see windows that don't close all the way or won't open and they're supposed to, or where they don't look, where they look like the wood around them is maybe not in the best condition, you're absolutely right. And so the report this morning is we're on top of that. We're looking at, the best way to stage it. Do you want to do the worst first and do it that way, or do you want to do, for example, do the entire sanctuary first and get that done and then move to another part of the church? That's all currently under evaluation, and we'll try to do that in a way that doesn't break the budget, but also gets our windows in better condition. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, and I will stay through the rest of the meeting, so if you think of questions later, I'll be happy to answer them then. Thank you.
Rick, thank you so much. And he's right, the trustees are really a fun group of people. And I would say we could probably use as many as 4 more on that team. So I encourage you to just do a little praying. You don't have to be have a mind for boiler operations to be on the Board of Trustees. It takes all of us to be a good team. Some people that care about the condition of the carpet, and others that care about the mechanics of the boiler. So do think about that and be ready for a phone call that invites you on that team. Or just make it easy and volunteer. I'll be around today. You can let me know. So now we're going to go through a membership report. So this was one of your handouts. And the first one to look at would be the one that says 2023 Annual Report - Membership Report. Got a lot of people's names on it. And I'm not going to read each one individually, but as in an effort of full transparency about where we're at with the comings and goings of the members of this church, that's what this report does. So at the top of it, you have all the newcomers. So we had a couple of confirmands, we had some other folks join, and we had some people transfer from other churches. And then we also had some people depart, and that happens through death or transferring to other churches, or people simply saying, we're withdrawing our membership. So you see all those folks listed there and the dates in which those decisions were made and processed. At this meeting last year, we affirmed the decision for Nathan Dahl and Preston Dahl to remove them from the membership because of inactivity, and a parent had requested that. But since they're adult members, we had to go through a 2-year process of removing them. So that's how people come and go from the congregation from an administrative standpoint. We've got notes there about some baptisms, and also notes about when parents leave and take their non-member, non-confirmed children, then we document them there in section 2. So the last piece of this report is a summary. So last year, the number of members we reported, there's a typo. It's on the 2022 annual membership report, we had 598 members. There's an adjustment from that because we discovered that somebody had died a previous year, and we discovered that in 2023. So we have an adjustment to make to that. So truly our membership at the end of 2022 was 597. The net activity from all the movement that we saw in sections 1 and 2 is -17. And then we had an adjustment because somebody was in error removed, and so we reinstated that person. You'll notice that she's also on the list of deaths. And so that's just an administrative practice to make sure her membership was here as her family reported her death to us, so that can be held here. And then Since I arrived, the numbers on these reports haven't lined up with the numbers on our electronic record keeping system, and I've just kind of held that, knowing that we need to true that up. Well, at this point in time, we're just, I can't explain what those differences are. I'm still looking for the differences, but for this report, I just wanted to true it up so that the numbers on this report equal the numbers that are of members that our record-keeping system says. And so that's a minus 31. So our electronic system and this report says that we have 550 members. So, and we are continuing to work on reconciling our records. When we moved into our electronic record-keeping system, the office discontinued the paper records, but we're required to keep both. And so trying to recreate them, or at least reconcile them. So I'm not going to say that it's done yet, because that's a very big job. And there's enough to do on any given week without giving a lot of attention to that. But we're chipping away at it, so it's getting better all the time. But I just want to share with you the complications that are making this difficult. So we're still auditing our membership rolls. On the back of this report, you'll see the inactive and unresponsive membership report. And this is something that you can help the best with. So we take attendance here when we're at church, so it's always important to sign the registration pad when you come. But it's also important to notice your friends when they're not here. Or if somebody comes to mind and you think, I haven't seen that person in a while, pick up the telephone and call them and check in and just say that you missed them. That is by and far the most helpful thing for a congregation to remain healthy, is to let each other know that you care. So anyhow, some of the ways we officially reach out are through prayer and email, seasonal contacts, social media, and a monthly newsletter that we mail to all of our membership and our constituents, so people that are actively involved who aren't members. Because we're not far enough along in the audit process to say, this list of people is inactive, and so we're going to recommend they begin that process of removal. 1 year inactive list, and then they would progress to a 2-year inactive list, and then in this conference we would say, okay, we affirm that their membership should be removed for inactivity. We're recommending that no people be on that list this year. So it's a pretty straightforward report. I wanted to share why that is. So, do you have any questions about this? This is something we have to vote on, and so this comes from the office, but I'm going to take a second for the report that's before you. Technically, it's just the back page that we have to vote on, but we'll take the report as it is, the two sides of your paper. So do I have a second to receive that? Thank you. And are there any more questions about it? All right, then I'm asking that you affirm the reports as they've been presented, except for this far up on the front page. The 598 was reported on the 2022 annual membership report, not the 2021. So with that correction, are all those in favor of receiving this report as it was presented, say aye. And all those opposed, say nay. All right. Motion carries. And now we get to hear from Byron, the chair of our Finance Committee.
Good morning, good afternoon. It's almost afternoon, right? So I get the fun job of going through finances. Hopefully we can make this a little bit fun and not super boring for those that aren't numbers people. There's a story behind that, and we're going to be able to tell that a little bit. So you have this handout in front of you, and it is kind of wears two hats, and that's what I'm going to be going over. How did we do in 2023? We closed the books a week or so ago because you have straggling expenses and things like that. And then we're here to talk about the budget for 2024. So the items in purple are the details on last year, and that's what I'll go through first. So first I want to acknowledge our finance committee. You guys can see the folks there: Bill Beardsley, Kent Holmes, some guy that's chairperson, Dave, Mac Lewis, who's on a ship right now, for anybody that doesn't know that, Tom Delaney, and our newest member is Mike Ollison. So I, like other folks, would absolutely encourage, quite frankly, it's a bunch of older gentlemen that are only on the committee, and we'd love to have additional folks as well as some diversity. So if you are halfway good with numbers or even just interested in the finances part of the church, it's a pretty small commitment for a nice give back. So 2023, I will tell you, myself and probably some others on the committee were a little nervous coming into October, and maybe even a little bit nervous in November, and we had a really strong December. And hopefully you know part of what we do at the Finance Committee is question things if they need questioning, kind of like a mini audit, if you will, on a monthly basis. Why is this number that? Why is that? And then we take some of that and communicate back to you. So if you've noticed, we've made an intentional effort in the newsletter to have a income and expense for the month. You won't have one for January because it's just, but you'll have that through the rest of the year. So that's our communication back to you with a little summary. And for instance, in the if you notice the tone of the summary that we were asking if you have the ability to give a little bit more, and you guys did. So hats off to everybody. We closed the year. You'll see that here with what I would call solid results, right? So our expenses, $689. The budget for both income and expense, as you probably know, are the same. We were short on income, and we were a little bit favorable on expenses. The net of that was $8,091. Now you might look and say, well, I noticed there's this line particularly called out in yellow, which is our draw from the reserve fund. We had budgeted, because it wasn't me, it was Dave Redpath, but last year someone presented to you the budget for 2023, and we said, you know, to balance income and expense, we'll need a $48,000 draw on our reserves to make that happen. Don't like to do that because obviously we have a limited amount of reserve funds. We'll talk about that in a minute. But we didn't want to keep cutting expenses or overly inflate what we thought the income might be. So that's our balancing mechanism, is the draw on the reserve fund. $48K draw on the reserve was what was budgeted. And big round of applause, $8,000 was all that was needed. So 1/6 of that amount. And that, I do believe, was largely in part to us trying to communicate the status to you guys and you guys responding. So huge thank you for that. So I call this kind of a back to normal year. We had some pretty lean years during COVID. Let's just be honest, right? You can see the bottom bullets there in terms of our reserve fund. That was what we basically used to get through those COVID years, to be quite frank. So income was a little bit short, pledged income and unpledged income. I'll talk about when we get to our budget. I think we have a much crisper, more accurate view of what our pledging intentions are, both explicit and assumed. And we had to make some assumptions through COVID because we weren't collecting pledge cards and things like that, right? So it was a little tricky. Expenses were under budget, and quite frankly, that's how we ended up with only a minor shortfall on a draw. Personnel, office, property, and then the buildings and grounds, right? All a little bit short of expense, which, like I said, helped us with the year. So our reserve fund, we ended the year with 91,565, and that is not too bad considering we were going to take a big chunk out of that, nearly half of that, and we obviously only had to pull 8,000 from that, so pretty great result. And then we'll talk about when we get to the budget coming up, but you can see here we've got a 15,000 earmarked draw on the reserve fund, so that would chip away at that 91,000, but we've also got a portion of that invested, and we're able to see a little bit of return there too. So any questions on 2023? There's some detail here. I'm not going to go through that. I'm just, if you're not a detailed person, I tried to pull out some of the highlights, right, and put those so that you guys can, as a finance chair and representing the voice of finance, pretty darn good year, right? I'm quite pleased. Yes, Dave, do you have a question? I didn't hear what he said.
Dave?
He's trying to make
So Dave said that there's investment returns in the reserve fund. And so the draw wasn't, it was recouped a little bit by some investment returns, right? He wanted to clarify that.
Correct. So I don't know if I can go back here. I can go back. So the reserve fund, really starting balance in January of 2023 and the ending balance was only 2,000 and some change difference, even though we made an $8,000 withdrawal. And why is that? Because we had some earnings through the year. As if you guys know your 401k or your investments, they did pretty good last year, right? And so the net of that was only a 2K reduction, even though we pulled 8K. So great point. Yep. Any other questions? Yes? So, Lynn, you might be able to help us out there from a personnel being under budget.
So the question was, on that slide, it says expenses were 15,000 less in personnel. So part of that is that there was a gap between Nikki's departure and Pastor Jim's hiring. And so we were underspending that budget line then. And there's also, that's how the personnel budget can be underspent, is when things like that happen. There's also a line in there for evening custodian that's not enough to hire somebody, but if we don't utilize those funds, then that is another portion of the underspending in that budget. And lastly, my compensation includes professional expenses, and so if I don't use them all, then that's a savings on the budget as well. And the same is true of all the staff. There's some mileage and some professional expenses, and those are there for folks to use, but in particular, in my case, there was a $5,000 written in for coaching. Should I choose to use it, I chose not to use it, so that's within that savings as well.
Excellent. I think there was one more question. Was there one more question? We're good? Awesome. All right, we'll get to the 2024 budget. So now you look at the blue colored column, and we'll take a look at that. And there's, as you guys can probably imagine, there's multiple passes at the budget for the Finance Committee. We divide it up real quickly from a process standpoint. Someone takes children and youth and works with Jan. Someone takes music and works with Paulo, et cetera, right? And goes through the different categories so that we can do our best to look at what was spent last year, what are the needs coming up for the year coming forward, which is the year we're in now, 2024. So a pretty good process. And then, of course, we look at the income side, which has a lot to do with pledging. So we'll talk about that in a minute. So that one of the key takeaways is there was some really good increase in what I call member giving, right? Specifically on the pledge side. So you'll see that on a slide coming up here. Overall, it's a 2% budget decrease. A lot of that is a balanced approach to expense reductions. You can see those by category, right, in the paper that you have. And then I'll remind you, most of our budget is fixed, right? And you could argue either fixed or semi-fixed, but personnel is mostly fixed unless we decide to do something drastic like add staff or cut staff. So that's mostly fixed. Our building, a lot of the expenses around electricity and gas and repairs and our office is also pretty much fixed as well, right? We've got a pretty good idea of what it takes to run the office from an expense standpoint. So a lot of the discretionary areas are in programming, and I don't know about you, but that's an area I really don't want to cut. That's the lifeblood of the church, right? So we try to be as thoughtful and intentional as we can in terms of looking at expenses, right? So then finally we end up, as you can imagine, after multiple passes, how are we sitting on an income basis? How are we sitting from an expense standpoint? And then what do we need to balance the budget? And that's back to what I talked about before. What amount do we need from the reserve fund to get those income and expense in line? And I'm thankful to say that we are presenting a budget to you that needs a $15,000 draw, which is much reduced from 2023 and 2022. Just as I talked about, those COVID years were very tough, not only on a church from an organizational standpoint, but also from a financial standpoint. So a couple things from the stewardship. I think this is a bright spot, to be quite frank. And I'm going to have to turn around here so I can see those, because I cannot see those from the back. So we have categories, what's called an explicit pledge and an assumed pledge. Explicit pledge is when, like Lori and I, send in our pledge card. That's an explicit pledge. When we went through COVID, and if you notice on the stewardship letter that was sent out, it says, if you gave in 2023 and you do not send in a pledge card and you're an active member and all that, we're going to assume your pledge into 2024. Unless you send in a pledge card, and that would either be the same amount or more or less, right? So we did have 98 folks send in an explicit pledge for $469,000 and some change. 51 folks, we ended up making an assumption, and the assumed pledge, we had to do some judgment, right? And it says if you pledged in 2023 and you gave at least 90% of your pledge, we're going to assume your pledge going forward. It's a judgment call. There's some folks that gave 80% of their pledge, they were not included. The folks that gave 90%, we assumed 100%, right? So we had to kind of make a judgment call. So we left some dollars behind, and we might have assumed some dollars that may or may not be there. But I feel pretty good about it. I feel pretty confident about that. So our total pledge, you can see the numbers there, 149 folks for a pledge of $580,000 and some change. That should correspond to the top two lines that you see on your budget on the side, right? The 580,882. We know the 80,882. Why? Because those folks in December typically sent in their pledge and fulfilled it, because they actually, just like we do in our household. We make a donation for tax purposes in December for all of 2024. So we know that number. So that's the 80,882 that's on your sheet here, second line. The rest is what we're balancing to that number, the 581,087. A little bit of rounding, but it's a nice even number. Just for comparison purposes, in 2023, what was our contribution? It was 528. So the reason that number is a little bit higher, because we got a really nice response from our stewardship campaign. Thanks to all of you guys. Some stats there, if you're kind of interested. Number of folks that increased their pledge, 36. Number that decreased, 17. Number that stayed the same, 96. And those includes those implied pledges because we assume the same amount, right? So that would be a same. The number I'm the most excited about or happy about, and that's why I said this return to normal, is that bottom line. So we have 14 folks that have not pledged before that are now a pledging person. They could be a new member, or they could be somebody that just stopped pledging, right, for the last 2, 3, 4 years. And they've raised their hand and said, you know, I believe enough in Good Sam now that I'm going to make a pledge. So that's super awesome. Questions on this? Average pledge, you can see that amount. I think there's an opportunity in loose offering, quite frankly, a little disappointing. But I think there's some opportunities there for some. We took a conservative approach on our budget here. This is super important. This goes a lot to, now we lost our slide, but this goes to a lot to the health of the church, folks. You guys can read into some of this, right? It's awesome. Okay. Our operating budget, some people like pie charts, really easy visual. You can see what makes up half of our expense, personnel, right? You can see that in the numbers as well. It's a little bit easier to see in a chart. Again, it's a 2.3% decrease. Personnel is actually a 3% increase. There's a 2%, I believe, increase in salaries, so that's nice. Trying to at least be responsive a little bit to the marketplace. But there are some subsidized areas that offset those expenses. And that is we applied for the employee retention credit, and we got a lump sum for that, and we're using that over last year and this next coming year to help subsidize that. And then we did have a previous donation that was for some, we'll call it 21st century type of funding for the new age of the way churches are running. And we're using some of that, for instance, like some of this cool live streaming that you're seeing now, right? A little bit of decrease in program areas, not much. Kind of right-sized to where we think we are planning on landing. Office, property, and building. A little bit of a decrease there as well. And then I'll remind you, in the building area, particularly, I can draw your attention to it. The last line on the back page where it says mortgage, we do pay for a portion of the mortgage out of our operating budget, and the rest comes out of the capital. And we're going to talk about capital in a minute here. We pay 1/4 of the monthly mortgage payment that we owe. We pay 1/4 of that out of the operating budget, 3/4 still comes out of capital fund. So, capital fund, so let's talk about that a little bit. As you know, we still have a mortgage, and it's mainly on some of the extensive remodeling we did, right, with the nursery and the gym and et cetera. Our capital fund balance at the end of the year was $69,784, and we are planning to use, remember I said 25% of the mortgage payment comes out of here, the 75% comes out of the capital fund, so we're planning on using $39,000 out of the capital fund to make those mortgage payments. Our annual debt obligation monthly amount is $4,331. You can do the math on that, times 12, ends up being a little over $50,000. Our mortgage balance, we keep chipping away at that. It's now $812,000. We have a loan with Bridgewater. So the other kind of neat bright spot is if you noticed on your pledge card, either the physical pledge card or online, you have a little section where you can give a few extra dollars, right, to the capital fund. We, in our household, did as well. We gave to the operating, gave a little bit, right? Every little bit helps. Everybody throws in 100, 200, 500, whatever, to the capital fund. It helps us keep the full mortgage out of our operating budget, right? So we can have a fund like the capital fund to help pay for that. So it's super healthy that we have that top number there, which you can see that we've got enough to fund through next year and part of 2025. But then we'll have to face that as a congregation. Do we have another capital campaign, et cetera? Or if we can keep giving as a part of our stewardship drive, then that helps keep this this process in place. So, and that is it for 2025 or 2024. Yes, Mary. You know, when Mary asks a question, it's just going to be a stumper. So.
There we go. We have a mortgage of $812,000. Remind us what the fantastic interest rate is on that, please.
Yeah, so I'm gonna let Bill take this because he was the one that helped negotiate that.
I think it's 3%.
So we have a 30-year mortgage. I think we're in year 4 or 5 of that. We have a 15-year readjustment to the interest rate, but we were able to lock in before interest rates went to the moon. Well, not quite. If I can remember, we had double-digit percentages, but we're in a really good spot right now, and we've got many years here to ride that 3%, which is awesome. So, other questions?
I have, let's just leave them on. I have a,
I can repeat the
check.
question if you haven't.
yeah, it's more of a general question. I'm not sure. Question from online. I think they're not seeing some of the documents, so that might be the question. But Joel was asking how much money is coming in, electronic versus cash, and how much is coming from memorial gifts or monies directed towards special funds. And then any additional discussion of additional building changes. So just a few general questions there.
So I think to repeat the question, if there's dollars coming in from memorial, how are those accounted for? Is that?
We don't budget memorial contributions, so that's
Yeah, so let me.
not part of the budget
This is
here.
kind of getting a little bit more detail, but it's worth mentioning. We do have a set of funds that we call designated funds. They are not part of the operating budget. There could be somebody that, and in the past was true, donated money for our stained glass windows. That went in a separate fund, also in our Bridgewater account, but it's not part. Think of your checking and your savings, right? In your checking account, that's where you've got income and you pay your monthly bills, right? That's your checking account. We also have a designated account that pays for, there's designated funds for music, for instance. There's designated funds for memorials, right? So there's multiple areas for designated funds that are not part of the budget that you have in front of you. So,
But some expenses come out of there, so you also don't see the expenditures in the budget. So it's just kind of a separate lane. And, you know, the document that you have, which we just distributed here, so online viewers, our apologies that you aren't necessarily seeing that, but it doesn't distinguish between online giving and physical checks that arrive. And so those two means of receiving money are integrated into these reports.
the only difference you'll see in the income in the first sections there is if you pledged and you gave, you're in the pledge line. If you're in the unpledged line, that means you're a member. You just didn't pledge, but you gave. Or the third bucket is loose offering, which says this came as a $20 in the offering plate that came around, or it's dollars that were donated online, and we can't associate that with a member of the church. It comes up as loose offering. So, yes, Lynn.
So at our house, every week, I'm putting aside a small amount of money because we need a new fence. And it'll happen, it has to happen. So if I was gonna put an additional small amount of money towards helping the church, where would you recommend that we designate it?
That's a great question. You're going to hear from the foundation in a minute as well. Claudia is going to give you a quick note there. Some really good opportunities, depending on the purpose of your gift, would be if you want to make a donation, like you said, if you've got an extra $50, $100 that can be applied towards this year, we'll absolutely need it. That'll reduce that $15,000 draw on reserve. If we don't have to pull as much like we did this in 2023, that helps keep that reserve fund to protect us into the future, which is super important for the health of the church. But if you have a legacy gift or maybe something that you believe in strongly from the foundation, and you'll hear a little bit about that, those are great opportunities as well. So,
Any other questions? Thank you, Byron. The budget is also something we need to vote on, and that's properly before you, coming from the finance team through the church council. So, are there any other questions about that? Oftentimes I lead by consensus, but we're going to go ahead and just call for a vote. So all those in favor of adopting the budget as it was presented, say aye. And all those opposed, say nay. All right, the motion carries. I want to invite Claudia to come forward for a report from our foundation, and we're nearing the end of today's meeting. So just know that there's a good word to come yet from Claudia, and then a very short administrative action that we need to take. So you just push this big circle when you want to advance it.
I've never been trusted.
Oh, yep, okay.
Okay, never, nope, not yet. Still
I
not trusted.
might have turned it off. There we go.
There we go. I've never been trusted with one of these things before. So, greetings from the foundation board. And as you can see on the screen, these are the members of the board, and for those on stream who don't see the documents, I think. Our members are Carolyn Carlin, Pat Decas-Becerra, myself, Lucille Grosch, Mary Lewis, Mary Olson, Byron Olson, Sam Verducci, and our newest member is Jane Kasiski. And this brings us to our 9-member required number of board members that are in our bylaws. The foundation has bylaws on how we operate, and we're part of the church, but we're really separate also in some of our administrative things, and our money is not commingled with the church money in the same accounts. We have our own accounts. So, we had some goals this year. First, as it's a goal every year, I guess, is to continue to raise the awareness of the foundation and the purpose of each of the 3 funds. We don't want you to ever forget that there's a foundation that does many good things for this church. We have 3 funds: the Evergreen Fund, which helps support the operating portion of our budget, which Byron has been talking about. We have the Cornerstone Fund, which is at the request of the trustees for major expenses as far as the church property and the church grounds. And then we have the Outreach Fund, which finances grants or grants for outreach work. Some things that are kind of mission-oriented. We kind of focus on say, food, housing, education, and things like that. So that's the board of the foundation administers those grants. And anyone can actually suggest or make an application for a grant from the Outreach Fund, any member of the church. And you can do it online, or if you want to talk to me about it, I'd be happy to talk to you. This year, 23, was the 30th anniversary of the foundation. Started out as a living trust, but in 2010 became a foundation with the 3 funds I just mentioned. So we thought it was a great idea for our 30th anniversary to raise $30,000. And midway through, we had an offer of a match of $10,000. So we kind of had 2 things running at the same time. And we were able to meet both those goals. We kind of made ourselves very present to the congregation, and they answered the call, and it was just great. So our 30-year challenge, it was a big ask. We haven't brought in, other than say a legacy gift, have not had simple, smaller donations from the general congregation equaling that amount for many years. And then the challenge of the $10,000 was a kind of a surprise, but it spurred great responses from the congregation. So by mid-October, we had met both challenges. 51 generous donors gave a total of $50,471, and which was just, we were so happy. So that money was divided between the 3 funds. Evergreen got $26,169. The Cornerstone Fund received $17,719, and the Outreach Fund received $6,583. We kind of pushed the donations to go toward Evergreen and Cornerstone, and when things came in undesignated, we as a board kind of decided which fund the donations would go to. Let's see, what else can I say about that? It was just great. I don't know what else to say. Yes, I think that. So, just to review, can you all see those pretty well? The beginning balances of the 3 funds were a total of $586,265. The total expenses was $42,926. Our total income was $62,730. And just to make my numbers match, if somebody's right there with their calculator, just kind of saying your numbers don't match, there's a line called income reinvested, and I think that's what was sold within the funds by the investment committee and then either reinvested in additional investing of other funds, or sometimes it went to cash because we anticipated and knew there would be a cash need. So the change was $69,114 over the course of the year. So that has us with our Evergreen Fund with $303,463. Our Cornerstone is at $73,963, and Outreach at $277,953. One thing with the Cornerstone Fund, it is pretty much all cash because the trustees have the biggest need for cash that exceeds 5% of what we make available to the Finance Committee out of the Evergreen and what the outreach amounts are for every year. And Cornerstone had about a $54 net increase because of what they spent or what they were given over the year. So the Evergreen, because of the wonderful donations that we had, if you saw on the line on the budget, they get $15,000 this year. That's their 5% of the balance of the fund at the beginning of the year. That's $2,000 more than they received last year. So, you know, that's, yeah, that it's, you might think it's just, you know, $2,000 isn't a big increase, but you have to remember that, say, a donation, 95% of that donation stayed in the fund to earn interest in the coming year. So that's great. And then outreach will receive $13,900, which is, let's see, we had $12,750 last year. So we received an increase as well. So one thing that we haven't done over the years is to actually thank publicly the people who gave to the foundation. And it's kind of something that's almost like a disappointment because we're so glad about the people who gave, want to, you know, publicly thank them that this year with the with permission or just with the okay from the church council, we decided that we wanted to have you all be aware and thank these people who believe so much in this church that they gave to the foundation this year. So we have several slides with people's names. Some people actually requested to remain anonymous, so this is not a public listing of everyone. But we're so appreciative, and people were so happy to give. We had so many people who were willing to have their names put out there so you can all see. And in the anonymous category, we had, let's see, my slides just a teeny bit, my notes are a little bit different. We had some great response for memorials. Actually, Dave Kuhn's memorial brought in 22 donations from non-members of this church. So friends and family who are not members of this church gave in memory of Dave. There were several others, but I'll have to say, because I'm not 100% sure if some of the gifts that we received were memorial and some were not, I didn't want to list anybody else. But the one for the memorial for Dave Kuhn was very memorable, and an encouragement that can happen at, any member, if they want to designate to the donations to the foundation, they can do that. So let's see, anonymous donors, non-members, we had 2 that we can't really connect with exactly what it was given for. They were just given, and they're non-members, and we don't actually know how they found us. And then 9 members requested that their donation just remain anonymous. So it's been a good year. The foundation board meets quarterly, and we're always looking for new members, just like everybody else. As you kind of saw, we're a little female heavy on the foundation board, but we could be like St. Paul City Council and be all women, if that's what, if that's what we have. It's a very easy committee to be a part of. We only meet 4 times a year, and if you're interested, please see me. So, does anybody have any questions? Oh. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. Okay. We have a quick item of business for clergy. The IRS allows a portion of our compensation to be designated as a furnishing or appurtenance, a household furnishing or appurtenance. And so Pastor Jim has requested that his salary be designated that way. So it doesn't change the amount we've agreed to pay for the role of Director of Congregational Care. It's simply an action that allows him to tell the IRS that this was used for housing, and so it changes the amount of income tax he has to pay on that. And so that is a privilege that the IRS gives clergy, whether they are active or serving in retirement. And so with that, we have a resolution before us to designate 100% of his 2024 compensation as household furnishing and appurtenance allowance. So do you have any questions about that? Then I'm going to just call for a vote so that it can be official for him. So first, well, this comes from the Staff Parish Committee, so won't need a second. But all those in favor of accepting this resolution, say aye. And all those opposed, say nay. So it's a very similar action to what we do for me in a couple months ago. So that concludes our business for today. Do you have any additional questions or anything come to mind before we leave? I want to thank you again for staying today and for your care and love and support of this congregation. It really is a privilege and a blessing to be your leader, and I enjoy that. And I know that as we move forward in a transition, we'll be able to tell each other that, and that's a good and healthy thing. So with that, I'm going to say that I encourage you to go with the assurance that the Good Shepherd is with you, and know that he is walking side by side with your every step. So, amen.